Welcome to this class in macroeconomics. In this mini lecture, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on what the heck is macroeconomics and why do we study it in the first place? And what we're going to see is that macroeconomics is really all about understanding how we run or ruin our economy in the short run. And so let's get going. The most frequently used metaphor for understanding what the heck macroeconomics actually is in contrast to microeconomics. So macroeconomics is the forest, whereas microeconomics is the tree. So when we're doing microeconomics, what we're doing is we're trying to analyze how a tree actually functions. We're looking at a specific thing. So in microeconomics, we often look at the individual consumer, right? And so how does the consumer, behave when they're buying and selling things? Or how does a firm behave? So we're looking at a specific firm or specific individuals or even specific markets. So how does the market for shoes work, right? And so we can look at different policy measures that take place in the market for shoes, or we can see, how firms enter and exit these markets, but we're looking at a specific market or consumer behavior or firm behavior. So we're looking at these trees, so to speak. In macroeconomics, we're looking at the entire forest. We're saying, man, it's not that the market for shoes has this thing happening, but the market for shoes, the market for bread, the market for investments, the market for you name it, right? All kinds of different things that people buy and sell and trade. The overall economy seems to be moving in the same direction. There seems to be things that influence all of the trees at one point in time. So we're kind of looking at the overall health of the entire forest, right? Not just what individual trees are doing, but how's the forest doing in general, right? So a microeconomist might study the systems that make an individual tree function efficiently, providing it with sustenance and what it needs to survive within the forest. Whereas a macroeconomist is taking this broader look at the forest as a whole and observing how these thousands of trees work together in conjunction with the sun, the soil, oxygen, nitrogen, all of these different things, and how it functions almost as one giant organism. So a macroeconomist might look for a few measurable indicators and try and understand their relationship with one another in making the forest healthy or unhealthy. Macro is this field of economics that studies the behavior of the economy as a whole, and not just on specific companies, but on economies as the entire country's economy or global economy, right? So this looks at economy-wide phenomena, right? And so we're going to use things like gross domestic product, which is going to be this measure of the entire economy's output. How much is our economy actually producing? Those are the kind of variables that we're going to be considering, right? And how that overall production is affected by changes in other kind of aggregate variables, such as unemployment or national income or rates of growth and price levels, things like that. And so that's what this class as a whole is going to be all about, trying to get a better understanding of how economists talk about the health of the overall forest, the health of the overall economy. For being big picture and looking at the broader scale, it's somewhat counterintuitively to understand that macroeconomics is really also about the short run, right? Whereas microeconomics is going to give us a little bit more information about an understanding of long run economics. Macro's main concern is the economy's current fluctuations, the short run, right? What is going on with the overall economy right now? Why is the broad economy all growing together well or falling apart simultaneously, right? So we're looking at the economy's current fluctuations or the short run with macroeconomics. We're studying some aggregate variables, the economy's level of investment, for instance, to see what that does to the health of the overall economy right now. And how is it influencing things now in the short run? Macroeconomics is the study of the way that certain key variables impact the overall economy, and there's some great truths and importance to these relationships that we know about. However, there is not much consensus in macroeconomics. So the jokes that you may have heard about economists, how they can't agree on anything, what we're really talking about here is macroeconomics. There's much disagreement in many theories in macroeconomics, whereas in microeconomics, there's quite a bit of agreement. And so you can see here, we have this picture of this number of schools of thought: the classicals, the Keynesians, the new Keynesians, the post-Keynesians, the new classicals, the neoclassicals, the monetarists, the Austrians. And this is just to name a few of them. And here I have like brief descriptions of all of them, but this is just to showcase how there's this stark differences between all of these different schools of thought. What I'm going to try and do in this class is try and keep things a little bit simple for you. This is an introduction to macroeconomics. And while we will cover a number of different schools of thought, what we're really going to do is we're going to kind of break it down primarily into two main theoretical approaches: the classicals versus the Keynesians. And really this kind of gets at the point of markets working without much interference, or markets, sometimes getting stuck in recessions and needing some assistance, needing some kind of intervention to make things working correctly. And so if you want to learn more about these schools of thought, at the end of this video, what we're going to do is we're going to have two options where you can just jump ahead to the debate between these schools of thought, or you can take kind of the longer route, kind of the student route, to make sure that you have all the terminology down so that you can understand the modeling and all of the depth of the terms that are used in macroeconomics to better understand these different schools of thought. And so what we're going to have, though, is we're really going to break these apart into classical versus Keynesian. For the Keynesians, we can use a metaphor where they see the economy like a machine. And a machine can have problems. And if there's one problem, then the whole machine might not work. So Keynes claims that there is a potential magneto problem. Just one glitch in a system, one error, that's keeping the whole machine from operating correctly. We can think of a car. If there's some element of a car that's not working correctly, then the whole engine might lock up and not work. And so the whole thing doesn't function the way that it's supposed to. And if we can just fix that one part of the car engine, or that one part of the machine, then the machine will work correctly. The engine will run. It'll continue working as it should. So if we could fix that one problem, then maybe we should fix that one problem. And if we see the economy that way, we could say, oh, well, here's some one problem with the economy or something that's lacking. Let's try to artificially correct that problem and get the economy working. So if there's one problem within our ecosystem that's preventing the flourishing of our forest, to use the trees versus forest metaphor, then we should fix that. This is in general what macro is all about. Should we or shouldn't we fix these different problems? And the Keynesians see the economy as kind of a machine where there's a bunch of different things that are happening, but there's certain variables that we could have go wrong. And if one of them goes wrong, well, maybe we can fix it. So we see kind of the overall macroeconomy as this overall machine that can be kind of manipulated. To see a metaphor of this, we have an upcoming video where they talk about kind of the overall variables and how they're interconnected like a machine for the macroeconomy.
What Bill Phillips did was so creative, lateral, and off the wall.
It's one of the first macroeconomic computers. It was built in the 1940s.
It is a computer. It's hydromechanical.
It's a model of the macroeconomy, so the economy as a whole.
Bill Phillips had created one of the most extraordinary economic tools that was created in the mid-20th century.
And so this machine here is going to show how water flows around the economy, or how money flows around the economy. We have this income tank down here, and this is water flowing up into the machine as income. Before the income reaches households, some of it is taxed, and for the government, this is income. So taxes flow down here as income to the government, then the government decides how much it would like to spend.
People who saw it could scarcely believe the achievement that here was this tremendous machine that laid out so simply and clearly all of the concepts and ideas of economics.
If the government does not spend all its revenue, then it'll have a surplus, and this is what this box here measures. The income that is after taxes, this is where it reaches a household, and the households have a choice to make. They have to choose between how much they'd like to save, and then what they don't save, they consume. How much a household saves will depend on the level of interest rate in the economy. When there's only a little bit of money in the economy, like there is now, there's very little water in here, this means interest rates are very high.
The principal purpose of the MONIAC was as a teaching tool.
In this investment fund here, which helps determine the level of interest rates, this will also determine how much investment firms undertake. So if we add these three components here up, this is our domestic part of the economy. So we've got government spending, plus consumption, plus investment. And this adds up to domestic expenditure, so the way all this water flows around.
It was possible, for example, for somebody like Phillips to have one operating in front of a class.
What we're going to do now is we're going to do a scenario involving the central bank. The level of GDP down here is very high, so the economy is running a bit hot. So what we're going to do now is we're going to drain money from the investment fund. So this is tightening monetary policy.
The MONIAC really pioneered the field of economic forecasting.
So when there's less money in this investment fund, we're going to see the level drop, which is just like seeing interest rates rise. So money's now more scarce. So what you can see on this chart here is the interest rate is increasing, and it's increasing rapidly.
As time went on, the advent of digital computers made it possible to have mathematical models that were vastly more complex than the MONIAC.
These slides here show how households and firms react to changes in the interest rate. So this bottom bit here shows how much do firms cut their investment when interest rates increase. This one up here shows how much do households stop consuming when interest rates increase. Down here, we will be importing a little less because our incomes are lower. Over on this chart over here, this is GDP. There hasn't been much of an effect, but this is something we would expect to see. The flows go around the economy and it continues having an impact for some time. So this means it takes time before monetary policy has an impact on the economy, which is what we see in the real world.
So can we understand different elements of the economy and how we can impact them by having this MONIAC machine type metaphor where we can say, how are all these variables interrelated? The Keynesians' claim of this magneto problem, this just one glitch in the system, one error keeping the whole machine from operating correctly, serves as this metaphor for understanding their general approach. If we can just fix one problem, if we can just kind of get things going, the engine will work again. And then maybe we should be doing these things. Maybe we should be trying to fix the overall economic machine. That's what we're going for. So our Keynesian schools of thought within macroeconomics are going to look for these problems within the MONIAC machine, or how we can use different levers like monetary policy or the interest rate, things like that, to change the overall flow of the economy and get things working once again. So to kind of summarize this, the Keynesians are saying, hey, there could be just some little glitch in our economy. The economy is kind of like this machine, and it has these interrelated parts. And if we can just fix some of those parts, right, then the whole machine can get working again. And this is in general what Keynesians say macroeconomics is all about. That every now and then we kind of can get stuck and have this problem with our overall economy, which causes our forest to start dying off. And yet we can understand the interrelations of some variables that we want to look at and possibly change some of those variables to get the forest growing healthy once again. The classical economists, the other kind of really broad school of thought, right? We're going to kind of break all of our mini schools of thought into this Keynesian versus classical debate. The classicals will view the idea that the economy as a machine to be tinkered with is at best wrong and at worst absurd and harmful. The classical schools appreciate the ideas of macroeconomics and the problems that we have with overall macroeconomics, that sometimes we end up seeing kind of recessions or hard times. But they still see markets as largely working well, and the tinkering with the economy as sometimes the source of much of our strife in economies. So the classicals are really kind of against the Keynesian view of, hey, let's tinker around with the different levers of the MONIAC machine. Instead, let's just let the economy go. Let's let it go. Let's not think that there is just one little problem that we can fix and get the whole thing, sliding around and flowing perfectly. Instead, let's just let markets do their thing. So in macroeconomics, we kind of have this Keynesian versus classical debate, or this magneto approach versus markets. Do we have magneto trouble where there's just a few things wrong that we could maybe fix? Or do we have, hey, let markets do their thing? There is a general consensus that in the long run, markets work quite well, right? And so this is where we kind of get a little bit more of that microeconomic consensus here. The invisible hand works quite well to clear markets, create efficiency, and bring wealth to the masses. There is a lot of consensus about this, but this is in the long run. In macroeconomics, many questions still linger. How long does it take us to get to the long run? While markets primarily work in the long run, are they less than perfect? Can we do better? Which schools of thought best understand the macroeconomy? right? What can we do in the short run? Because short run complications can have really traumatic and lingering effects. Well, so what? Why do we care about these various different schools of thought? Why go through an entire class to understand that there is not consensus in macroeconomics? You could say, so what? Why would I do this? You guys, you economists, can't even agree what the right economic theory is. And so you're going to make us kind of learn all of them and understand the debate? Why would this matter at all? Well, why should we study macroeconomics? Well, in part because these different schools of thought are actually impacting the policy around us, right? So when you hear on the news and they're talking about economics, most of the time they're talking macroeconomics. And a lot of times they're making assumptions or they're working from within a vision of a certain school of thought. And they speak as though this is just plain truth. Like, oh yeah, clearly, if we increase government spending, that will spur the economy forward a little bit. Well, that statement is not true to all macroeconomists. That is from a very specific school of thought. And so if you just want to understand the news around you about economics, you kind of have to know these various different schools of thought and what all of this macroeconomic stuff is. But more importantly, you should want to understand macroeconomics because these are serious and important questions about the way that we live our lives. What you guys will see in these upcoming lectures is important questions that pertain to the wealth of the macroeconomy and how well it's actually functioning. And you might say, oh, well, that just sounds kind of like, okay, more wealth, this kind of stuff. You're not really concerned about people. It just sounds like money, 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 money. Well, the reality is that these macroeconomic ideas have serious consequences for the things that we actually care about the most. Right? So when we have high rates of unemployment, which can be macroeconomic consequences, what we end up seeing is this greatly impacts people's lives. Suicide rates, domestic abuse rates, not to mention just the idea of, hey, it's not fun to be unemployed and looking for a job. The way that we view ourselves as individuals within a society is often greatly impacted by the work that we do for others. And if we have these ups and downs of the overall economy that cause people to be laid off or unemployed for long periods of time, this can have serious impacts on the way that they view themselves as a fulfilled individual. And so we want to understand macroeconomics so that we can understand what is happening in the economy, what is happening to individuals and how they live their lives and actually move their personal lives forward when it comes to serving other people and interacting within society. It's major questions that we want to ask, and they are very hard to understand. There's still lots of debate, but you want to be able to interpret what the debate actually is and hopefully understand what policies are actually improving the macroeconomy, what policies are harming the macroeconomy. Because economists, while they don't agree about much in macroeconomics, they do have some knowledge from past lessons that we have learned by going through some macroeconomic foibles. And so strap in, we're going to get ready, we're going to take off on a journey in macroeconomics. If you guys would like to take kind of the long journey, the overall picture, to get all of the terminology, the why study macroeconomics, the growth theories, the definitions of interest rates and inflation and GDP, kind of the student version of the course, the introduction to macroeconomics, click on the video on the left as you see it. That will take you through the entire course. But if you want to just kind of jump ahead to the various different schools of macroeconomic thought, you can click on the video to the right and you will be taken there.